By the time I finally got around to seeing this, people already stopped talking about it. I guess the discourse got old pretty quick. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about a newer theatrical release, Old. Before I begin, let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie were, if you already saw it or if you were planning on seeing it, and make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my channel out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases, older films, hidden gems, and so much more on a near daily basis. But let's jump right into it and let's talk about Old. This focuses on a family on a tropical holiday who discover that the secluded beach where they are relaxing for a few hours is somehow causing them to age rapidly, reducing their entire lives into a single day. This is based on the graphic novel Sandcastle, and it's written and directed by the one and only M. Night Shyamalan. And before I go any further, I want to make one thing explicitly clear. I am neither a diehard Shyamalan fan, nor am I someone who hates him. I take him on a case-by-case basis at this point. He's just way too inconsistent for me to get really excited, but I also don't go into his movies wanting them to be bad, like a lot of the people who do hate him seem to want. I noted in my most anticipated movies of the month video that the concept for this looked really interesting, and it could be cool if done the right way. But the one thing that really threw me off just based on the trailer was the acting. It didn't sit right with me, and it seemed to be disjointed, and I had a feeling that could potentially be this movie's biggest drawback. And this essentially confirmed what I figured would happen. But before getting into what I didn't like, let's start with some positives. Now, I do really like this concept. While it's something that can easily lend itself to being a bit on the gimmicky side, if you play around with it right, it can be very effective. And I think there were a number of times where it would be pretty effective. I like the overarching theme that it seemed to go for about how life passes us by in seemingly a moment's notice. Like, characters will age at rapid fire speeds, mainly the younger ones. There's an older woman who's with our characters when they first arrive on the beach, and it should go without saying that she goes pretty quickly. You also have characters with medical conditions that get heavily exacerbated because of the beach's effects, which would be especially some of the more chilling moments as we watch them helplessly break down. And these things would happen in an instant, so a few of these sequences would definitely catch me off guard. I also like the air of mystery that was built around the whole thing. Now, something I will give Shyamalan a lot of credit for in general is that he generally does know how to set the right tone. And here, the score was pretty solid. There was a nice sense of claustrophobia, especially due to some pristine sound mixing, like whenever there'd be a moment of silence among the characters and all we hear are the waves crashing, the sounds would be amplified to really bring out the harsh qualities of the waves hitting the beach. Plus, part of the concept is it turned out to seemingly be impossible to leave the beach. We'll see characters attempt to make an escape only for them to black out and mysteriously wind back up where they started. And I liked how this was handled, especially when Shyamalan replicated the disorienting feel the characters would undergo. And I think there were enough moments that would come out of left field and things that would kind of catch me off guard that it kept me wanting to see what would happen next. I found myself wanting to know how things would unfold, mainly because of some of these rapid fire aging moments that would feel surreal. Unfortunately, I think the film's strengths lie in its individual moments, and overall, it's less than the sum of its parts. Now, I actually don't quite dislike this movie, and there was enough that I liked that I'd say I had a pretty okay time with it. But I was on the fence about it nearly the entire time. I found myself going back and forth a lot. And one thing worth noting is that the rules for this beach didn't seem to be quite consistent. The children age pretty rapidly, and as I mentioned, an older woman dies not too long after they get there, yet most of the core adult characters, who are all perfectly healthy, all manage to look just about the same for, I'd say, 95% of the movie's runtime. And while this movie will answer some of your questions, that isn't one of them, so I was disappointed there. And speaking of the characters, I thought they were only okay. We get a lot of them, with the main two being Gael Garcia Bernal and Vicky Creeps as a married couple on the verge of divorce who take their two kids on one last family vacation. But you also have Rufus Sewell as a doctor with some sort of mental illness, Abby Lee as his wife, Aaron Pierre as a rapper named Midside Sedan, Ken Leung as a nurse, Nikki Amuka Bird as his wife, among a few others. And we really don't get that much time dedicated to any of them outside of Bernal and Creeps, along with their kids. And even then, it's only by so much. I felt like we barely learned a thing about them other than what they do for a living, which is a recurring topic of conversation as Bernal and Creep's son would go around randomly asking anyone and everyone he meets what their job is, just because. So my investment in what happened to them only went so far. While I said earlier this did hold my attention long enough, I cared more just to see what Shyamalan would do with the concept rather than because I felt some sort of emotional attachment to these characters themselves. This is a very concept-driven film, and it often showed. Going back to what I was saying earlier about the film's themes of how moments can pass us by so quickly, that would both be a good and bad thing. The film's pacing was definitely off. There would be times where we'd be honed in on just one particular moment where the characters are attempting to take a breath, yet there's nothing really driving the story forward, and these scenes felt almost pointless. But then all of a sudden, we'll get a ton of stuff thrown at us, like one thing after another. And like I said, some of the ways in which Shyamalan played with this concept of people rapidly aging would be cool to the point where he's trying to disorient us, but sometimes it just moved along so quickly that you barely felt anything during what's supposed to be an intense moment, and it may not fully resonate with you what just happened. Like, you're left to take a breather during some of these inconsequential moments that go on for way too long, yet when things are meant to feel intense and the stakes are supposed to be increased, you barely have a moment to let it process before Shyamalan just moves on to the next thing, and it just felt numbing at times. And what didn't help either, and like I suspected going in, this was my biggest issue with the film, is that the dialogue and acting can be painful at times. Now, not everyone did a bad job. All the kids, when they first grow up, where they're played by Alex Wolff, Thomasin McKenzie, and Eliza Scanlon, are all fine. I also thought Rufus Sewell was great, as was Aaron Pierre. But what was particularly frustrating is that our two main characters, played by Bernal and Creeps, the ones we spend the most time with, are given some of the film's worst dialogue. And I mean atrocious, to be perfectly honest. There's a moment where they fight early on, and I just couldn't buy it as two people who are letting out all their built up frustrations. Like, they'll go from 0 to 100 like that, and it just didn't feel natural. And there are moments where they need to react to something huge, or they're commenting on a pivotal moment, and it felt wooden. And it wouldn't just be them. Even with some of the more reliable actors, they can even come off as a little stiff from time to time. And I know it's not totally their fault. Like, I've seen Bernal, Creeps, and most of the other cast in projects before, and I know they can do a great job. It's just that they're going off the direction they're given. And again, that's why I say I'm always hesitant going into a new Shyamalan movie, because there are times where he's really on point and he helps bring out great performances. Like in a more recent example, James McAvoy in Split. But then he goes from that to this, where we get a bickering married couple and he can't convince us that the fight they're having is truly genuine. Not to pick on the guy, but it just doesn't seem like there's any consistency there. Now, what I will say is the one area where he actually did a pretty solid job overall was the ending. I won't spoil it, and I do think it didn't go quite as far as I would have liked, but as usual, there's a twist, and with Shyamalan's twists, they can make or break the movie for me. Like, some twists have really enhanced his movies, but then there are some films where I think it's only okay for the most part for the entire time, but then we get to that last act and whatever curveball he throws at us, it immediately tanks the entire movie for me. But this one's pretty good for the most part. It definitely could have done more, and I think it should have answered more questions, but it worked enough for me. Shyamalan is clearly 110% confident in his works, especially when he goes for those endings, whether they work or not. And he just goes for it. And I will say, I do appreciate that about him. And this was once again on display when we got to this ending. And for some of the themes it brought up, I liked it enough to say that it ended this wildly inconsistent movie on a solid enough note. Old is a mixed bag. On one hand, Shyamalan does set the atmosphere well, he does play around with this unique concept well enough in a number of scenes, and there's enough of these moments that it maintained my interest, and I thought they were done well enough, including the ending. But on the other hand, the film's less than the sum of its parts. The acting and dialogue can be painfully bad, while the characters are thinly written, and the story doesn't go nearly far enough as it should. Now, while I was on the fence for much of the film, there was enough that I'd say it kept me fairly entertained. But I'd get it if you said you really didn't like this. I think it's not one of Shyamalan's best, but nowhere near one of his worst. It lands somewhere in the middle for me. But like a lot of his other films, I think you'll have plenty to talk about after. Old gets a 6 out of 10. So let me know, did you see Old, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Was this one of the best Shyamalan movies for you? Was it one of the worst? Did you find it to be somewhere in the middle? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep having fun with film.